It's Kristina Nakaya coming to you for round 2 of the Fit and Bendy Q&A, and we have lots of good questions this week. I want to apologize, I've been a little bit late because I've been trying to set up my external webcam and it's just not working. Like I said last week, stretching, great. Technology, not so much. So let's get right into it. I'm afraid since I'm broadcasting off the computer, I keep having to lean over to look at things. Bear with me. This is going to get much better technically as time goes by. First question is for Shakira. She would like to be better at Cobra with head to feet. That is a super fun pose. So the pose that she's asking about, I'm going to attach a photo during the when I put this up on YouTube, but basically it's when you press up to Cobra, you drop your head back and then you touch your feet to your head. So a lot of that is hips and upper back. And I'm going to be talking about a lot of people this week have asked about upper back flexibility. So if you're training a lot of back flexibility, you will have noticed that it is much easier to bend your lower back than your upper back. If you look at the structure of the back, this part of the back naturally likes to bend. On almost all people, this part is going to naturally bend backwards, whereas the upper back tends to like to bend forwards. And especially because we spend so much time sitting and we're hunched over the computers and we're driving and we're always folded inwards, that's going to emphasize that tightness and that forward bending in the upper back. And we also tend to have a lot of tightness in the front of the hip joint. If this part of the hip here is tight, what that's going to do is it's going to pull the pelvis forward. And you see then I end up collapsing into the lower back. So the problem with all of this is that when you go into your back bend, let's talk about that pose, the extended Cobra with the feet bent. What happens is if you try to just push up into that and you're not thinking about all these different parts, what's going to happen is primarily the lower back is going to bend. And it's going to be very difficult if your hips and your upper back are tight to ever get your feet to your head if you're relying only on your lower back. The only way that's going to work is if you're one of those people with an insanely foldy lower back, which is unhealthy even if it looks awesome. So what you want to really think about, and we're going to talk about this in more detail with a lot of the other questions as well, is trying to actually tuck the pelvis under. And I know it sounds weird. We think about always relaxing through the back and trying to stick the butt out in back bends. But really what you want to do is get a lift through the hips and think about tucking the pelvis under. Because you see, when I bring my pubic bone up and forward and I push my butt down, then I get this length through the front of the hip. And that's going to give you that extra lift. And if you have the tightness in the hips, if you're not lengthening through the front of the hip when you're in your Cobra, it's going to be really difficult for you to ever get your head back over your butt. Your head's always going to stay really far forward, and your desire is to get your head back, which is where your feet are. If this is really difficult for you, then stretch your hips and quads a lot, because this is definitely a hip and quad stretcher as much or more than it is for your back. And then the last part is to think about the upper back. And I'm going to talk about this a lot more a little bit later in the broadcast, but the thing about the upper back is if it naturally wants to go forward, just kind of relaxing into your back bend and allowing the back to bend however it wants is never going to open up that upper back. You have to really engage the muscles. And I'm going to get into a little bit more of that later. But just know that you can't just kind of push with your arms and hope that eventually you'll get your head to your feet. There has to be a lot of muscular work that happens too to make the back bend and the hips bend in the right places. Otherwise, what you're going to do is end up collapsing and pushing into that lower back a lot. A, you'll never get as far as you would like, and B, you'll end up hurting your lower back. So let's not do either of those. All right, next question. Thank you so much, Shakira, for that. Cynthia, hello. Feet to the head, same question, and also legs over the head in chest stand. So I'm hesitant to go into too much detail about chest stand because it's a whole discussion in and of itself, and there are definitely ways that you can do it that will not be good for your body. But if you are already working on chest stand, here is an important thing to think about. don't think about getting your legs forward and your feet to the floor. If you think about that, then you end up, again, collapsing to the lower back. And I have certain things that I talk about a lot, and the collapsing into the lower back is a real problem. Don't think about getting your feet to the floor. Think about getting your butt over your head. Because what I see a lot now, imagine that this is our little chest stand person. Here is the head of the person. They're looking this way. This is their nose right there, tail. And this is their butt. So the spine is coming along here, and then the legs go forward, okay? Can you kind of picture it? From here, what I see a lot are people trying to get their feet to the floor, but their butt's way back over here. So what's happening is the back is essentially folding. It's hinging right at that lower spine. This is not the right position. This is not where you want to be. You want to be here. You want to have your butt over your head. Now, if you're really bendy, eventually your butt gets on your head. You get head sit. I'm not saying that you have to have that at first. That takes a little while. Even if your butt's up here, you want to have your butt over your head. What that means is you have to shift your weight forward into your chin and shoulders. Your chin and shoulders have to be on the floor, and your weight has to come forward. I've been seeing a lot of people, pictures of people working on chest stand where the butt is still way back here. This is not good for your lower back. You've got to get that butt forward. It is uncomfortable. Chest stand is, it's not the most comfortable position. Imagine that. You're wrapping your spine around your head. It's hard at first to breathe, and you feel like you're putting a lot of pressure on your neck. So you have to go very slowly with this. You have to develop the muscles, because it takes a lot of muscles in your upper back and your core, so you're not collapsing down into that position. So that's a really brief overview. And if you're not already working on chest stand and you're not sure how to get into it, I highly recommend not just hurling yourself into it and trying it. Try to find someone who already knows how to do it to work with you a little bit, because it is a position where you putting a lot of pressure on some delicate areas in the neck and lower back. So be very careful working on chest stand. Alrighty, moving right along. Antronic. Oh, I have enjoyed my correspondence with you. Let's see, your question this week is for someone, again, we're going to the upper back, thoracic extension. So the thoracic area, here's a little bit of anatomy. The thoracic area goes from about the middle of your back up to the base of your neck. So we're going to talk about that area of the back from just below the shoulder blades up to where the neck starts. So how do you get just that area to bend without getting the lumbar spine, which is the lower back, to bend? And this is a real issue for a lot of people. Yes, he's saying that his spine, his upper back, just doesn't seem to want to bend backward. Well, my dear, you are not alone. Many people struggle with this problem, where the lower back wants to take all of the bend, it just wants to fold, and then the upper back just looks like a board, basically. So I in a lot of my classes and my videos, I emphasize trying to isolate the lower back from the upper back so that you can get the two to bend separately. And it gives you a lot more awareness and control. I mean, we can't see our backs. And I think because of that, and because we're so forward focused in our lives, we're always forward focused, a lot of times the sensitivity to different parts of the back and what's going on back there sometimes gets lost. And then when we start working on back bends without that sensitivity and really paying attention to what's going on back there, that's when your body will always take the path of least resistance, which is the lower back. So what I recommend is becoming really aware of your hip positioning. I'm in New Orleans right now, so my setup is really not ideal. I'm not in a studio, and I'm in a rather overstuffed house. So bear with me. Let me scoot this back with the cleavage. Yay. All right, so here I am. I have a lot of hyperlordosis, which means my lower back is very flexible. And I'm constantly having to fight that because it's really easy for me to collapse into my lower back. My upper back isn't too tight, but it's definitely not as good as my lower back. So this is the way that I taught my upper back to bend, is I started to learn how to keep my lower back from bending. So what I recommend doing is you take your hands like this, you put the heels of the hands on your hip bones, these are my hip bones right here, and then you find your pubic bone, which is right here. So there's this triangle, this is the front of your pelvis. Now, this is how you can tell if you're standing up straight or if you're allowing your back to bend. If you stand to the side, you want that triangle to be flat. Now, my natural inclination is to want to stand like this, where my pubic bone is behind my hip bones. But then you see what happens is my abs, they just kind of relax, they kind of hang out, and they're not doing their job, which is to support my lower back. As soon as I think about lifting the pubic bone up and forward, and then I think about taking the meat of my upper butt and pushing it down away from my lower back. So I'm trying to create some space and length and support for my lower back, and I'm engaging through my lower abs. And it's really the lower abs that are going to be working to hang on to that pelvic movement to make sure that it's not starting to drop and rotate like that. And for those of you who are super hyperlordotic, this probably feels weird and uncomfortable, just standing like this and not doing anything else. It certainly did for me at the beginning, but really trying to find this position with these hip bones flat. Now you notice my butt still sticks out, so this is why you want to judge it from the front, because if you have any kind of booty, the booty isn't going anywhere. Like for me to get my booty to go away, I'd have to go into a deep tuck like this, and that's not what I'm talking about. So use the bones in the front to find the position. All right, so here I am. I've got my hands on my hips. My lower abs are engaged. I'm pushing the flesh of my upper buttocks down, and even once I move my hands away, I'm still imagining that lengthening where the butt and the lower back separate. From here, the next thing that's going to happen is I'm going to try to get that upper back to bend. Let's scoot back a little bit. So I'm going to roll my shoulders up, back, and down. And when you drop the shoulders down the back, you're going to feel the muscles firing right underneath the shoulder blades in this area right in here. Now those are the muscles, those muscles underneath the shoulder blades are what are going to help to get the upper back to bend. You've got to engage those, pull the shoulders down and back, and start to lift the chest. So the upper back bend really is a chest opening. You're opening up this entire area here by lifting your sternum straight up towards the ceiling. Move my arm out of the way. So this isn't going to move. My sternum lifts up towards the ceiling and the upper back starts to bend. And what we're trying to do, it doesn't have to be a big movement at the beginning. You're just trying to find the muscles that will engage. And again, this stays still as the upper back starts to bend. It feels a lot at the beginning like an ab workout, because you really, especially if you don't have a super stable pelvic floor to start off with, which with untronic, I don't think that's your problem. I think it's probably just finding those upper back muscles. But for those of us who are hyperlordotic, those lower ab muscles are often pretty weak because we're so used to standing and the weight is held by the hip flexors instead. Tight hip flexors, weak lower abs. So at first, it just feels like really a lot of work to hold the body in that straight position without letting your butt stick out. But over time, those muscles will build and you'll be able to get a greater range of motion with the upper back without feeling like you have to collapse into the lower back. And if you're someone who's naturally really strong and you have a lot of muscle, part of what might need to happen is opening up the chest. So if you do a lot of like push-ups and weightlifting and you've got a lot of like big bulky muscles through here, that's going to have to open up a little. So stretching out your pecs and the fronts of your shoulders, these kinds of stretches might help to open that up as well. So hopefully that's helpful. All right, I'm going to be here for 2 hours if I give everybody these long answers. I get excited. I find this exciting. Georgana, am I pronouncing Georgiana? Georgana? I am not sure, but we have a lot of questions today, which is great. Let's see. Well, we were talking about wheel last week, so I want to get back to that really quickly. So bridge wheel, I know she's having a lot of difficulty with that, pushing up and feeling like you get to a certain point and your body just isn't strong enough to support and you come back down. And I've seen a lot of people come in with that problem. It's not uncommon, and it's a combination of maybe not being super strong in certain parts of your body, especially in the upper back and in the backs of the legs and the abs. and it's or the arms as well. I mean, it takes some strength to hold a wheel position. And I think it's also just once the front of the body opens up more, it will be easier because you won't be pushing against the tightness in your own muscles as much. But I do have some tips for you about how to try to build that strength without just pushing up from the floor and falling back down, which is frustrating. One is to get a big Pilates ball. And if you can lay back over the ball and get both your hands and feet on the floor at the same time, which that alone might take a little work. So that's going to be that a little bit more of a passive stretch to open up the front of your body just by laying back over the ball. But if you can get your hands and feet on the floor at the same time, the ball will support you already pretty high up off the ground, and you just try to lift up off the ball a little at a time. So it will help you at the top of your bridge and to sort of start to feel that position and feel the opening without having to push all the way up from the floor. So that can be very helpful. The other thing, and I'm gonna move my computer down to the floor so you guys can see this. More cleavage, yay! Here we go. So I have yoga blocks here. So I'm just going to use the edge of this fireplace. And imagine that these are yoga blocks, okay? Now what you're going to do is you're going to take 2 yoga blocks and push them up against the wall because you want to be able to put weight into it the way I'm putting weight into this fireplace. And this is helpful if upper body strength is part of the problem for you, because what this does is it gives you something to push off of. So you would put your hands on the edges of the yoga blocks like so, and make sure that your elbows are pulled in. You want to try to get that alignment. This is really not an ideal setup, but I'm hoping you can understand what I'm talking about, even though I don't have the setup here. So I'm pushing a little bit, pushing my body away, and I'm going to start to come up, so my hips come up off the floor first, and I push with the arms a little bit to start to come to the top of the head. And that way I have something that gives me a little bit of leverage and a little bit of help. So it's not, I'm not having to lift my shoulders straight up in the air as much. It's more kind of a pushing out. And a lot of people find that to be easier to start with. Here, going back to my comfy chair. So give that a try. It also takes some of the pressure off of the wrists to have the hands hanging over the edge of the block like that. So hopefully that will help you a little bit. If you need more clarification, just let me know. Okay, and you had a bunch of other exciting questions. Tightness in the abductors. Yes, a lot of times tightness in the abductors is confused with tightness in the hamstrings. So where are the abductors? The abductors are the muscles that abduct your legs, that move them apart. So it's these muscles in the outside of the hip here. And they connect to the IT band, the famous IT band that runs out the side of your leg and often feels tight and cranky. And they also have a connection through the outermost muscles of the hamstrings here. So sometimes when you think you have really tight hamstrings, it's the abductors actually that are pulling your leg out of alignment and pulling it out to the side. So Jordana noticed that she really feels the stretches in the hamstrings when the leg moves slightly across the body. And that is the stretch that I highly suggest for people who have really tight abductors. You can also do pigeon poses and rotational ones like that, but really one of my favorites, and you can do it lying on your back like the Bendy body video, and that's very helpful. Or if lying on your back feels like a lot of work, because pulling your leg in like that can feel like a lot of work, you can put your foot up on the chair in front of you like this, and it doesn't have to be very high off the ground for you to feel it. And normally we would put the foot just straight, coming straight out from the hip, but instead move it just slightly across the body. So see, now this is it going straight out in front of me. Here it's going straight in front of me. Instead, I just move it a little bit that direction across the body, but try to keep pulling this hip back. And what that's going to do is really target the outside of the hamstrings. And the outside of the hamstring goes up into those abductors, and it will really start to open up the outside of the hip. So that's one of those stretches, like I like to call them the puke and die stretches, like those muscles that get just super crabby and tight. So it might be a little tense. Just go slowly with it, and it will get better. I promise. Just go nice and slow. Next question. Jargana was also saying that after doing the bendy body video, she feels really tired, as if she was doing a workout instead of stretching. That's really that's funny, because it is a workout. Stretching is a workout. There's a myth that stretching is this, like, sorry, she's protecting me from the chickens outside. There is a myth that stretching is like this soothing, relaxing thing, and you know, like, restorative yoga is very soothing and relaxing. Stretching, hush, shh, enough. Stretching should not be relaxing. Afterwards, yes, afterwards you should feel relaxed, but also tired, because if you're stretching correctly, you're using your muscles a lot. Stretching is not about like just kind of like slumping into something. It's about a workout where you're using your muscles to lengthen other muscles. If you are doing your stretches and you don't feel like you're getting a workout, then you're not doing them right. So I would say that you're doing a great job, and go ahead and get really tired and get exhausted and get sore, and take your time with it. If you're too exhausted, obviously take a break, but nothing wrong with feeling sore and tired afterwards, as long as it's that good sore and not like bad sore, like you push too hard. Pace yourself and stuff, but that's your body getting stronger. Yay, muscles. That's happy news. I am very happy for you. All right, moving along. Fiona Winfield. It's a good romance novel name. Best exercise for opening up the shoulders and chest for back bend. See, I told you guys there was a lot of shoulders and chest questions today. So I just told you guys one of my favorite upper back exercises of isolating the lower back and extending the upper back. And I'm not going to go a lot into specific shoulder and upper back exercises. Both of the DVDs have full shoulder and shoulder stretching routines. Bendy Body is more active flexibility, and Get Bent is a little bit more passive flexibility, but they're both really good. But what I will say is this, is that one of the biggest problems that we have with accessing shoulders and upper back is in the rotation of the shoulders. So shoulders are a pretty mobile joint. There are a lot of options of where your shoulders can be in the joint in order to get them to move, but there's only one happy way that the shoulder should be, and that is externally rotated. So this is internal rotation of the shoulders, and this is external rotation of the shoulders. The shoulder, when you are extending it, should always be externally rotated. There are pretty much no exceptions to this that I know of, especially if you're going into a deep extension or anything that is weight bearing. So you aerialists, this is really important. So what that looks like when the arm is extended, this is internal rotation, this is external rotation. So you want to think not just about the shrug, which we talk about a lot in aerials, sliding the shoulder blade down the back, but about actually rotating the outside of the armpit forward as you pull the bicep in towards the ear. So getting that rotation. Notice that if you can try this out, everybody try this out at home. If this shoulder's internally rotated and I try to pull my arm back, I can pretty much immediately feel a pinchy sensation is in here. And this is actually where a lot of contortionists and aerialists get injured, is that pinching right there that comes from too much internal rotation and extension of the shoulder. Instead, try rotating it down into the socket, feel that rotation, and then pull it back. And you'll notice it's able to go much further and there's no pinching sensation, because what that does is it actually pulls the humerus, the shoulder bone, into the socket and puts it in alignment. If you're new to doing that, it feels a little challenging at first. It feels like a lot of muscle. It feels like a lot of work, and it is. And once again, yay, muscle. So you've got to build the correct muscles. It's a lot of muscles through here. If you're feeling that a lot up in here, you're not using the right. These are the internal rotators. The external rotators are down in here. So again, it's the upper back muscles that you really need to get the shoulder and upper back extension. There's a lot of exercises for that in Bendy Body, finding those muscles. Who's next? Next. Kim Ferguson Cartwright. Oh no, I skipped Johanna. Sorry about that, Johanna. I'm coming back to you. Pigeon pose is very uncomfortable. You tried putting yoga block under your butt, but that didn't work. So if pigeon pose is uncomfortable, I would say try doing it standing instead. So what you're going to do, it's very similar to the hamstring stretch that we did earlier. We'll try doing it facing you guys. Let's see if this works. So you're going to take your leg and you're going to put it up onto the chair in front of you. And this would be the hamstring position. So the leg would be straight and the thigh facing up. Instead, bend the knee and let the leg fall out to the outside. Now you can try this with various degrees of bend. So you can really bend the leg in and bring the hips close to your heel, or you can try it a little bit more extended, and all of them will give you slightly different stretches in the hip. From here, you're going to slightly stick out your butt and start to bring the body forward. And as you bring the body forward, you're going to start to feel that stretch and the outside. And these are your abductors again. This is the external rotators of the leg. This whole area out here, you'll start to feel that stretch. But the nice thing about doing it standing instead of in the pigeon pose is you don't have all of the pressure of gravity working on you. Pigeon is if you have really tight hips, pigeon can be pretty intense and painful. So if you try it standing, you don't have to lean all the way forward. You can go just a little bit of a way forward, and you can adjust the height of the leg, and you can adjust the amount of bend in the knee. So you have a little bit more control, and you can go a little slower to make your body feel safe and happy and give it that ease in the stretch that you need in order to get it to relax. And once you've been doing that for a while, try going back to the pigeon pose, and it will start to get easier for you. Hope that helps. Now we're on to Kim Ferguson Cartwright. When doing the hip opening stretch, my thigh muscle gets in the way. Is it okay to take the wider of the body line? Okay, so we're talking about lunges here. And is it okay to take your leg out to the side and lunge in order to go deeper so that you don't run into your own thigh? I'm going to say no. And the reason for that is the reason that your thigh is getting in the way is because your butt's sticking out too much. It was a little hard to tell from the photo that you sent me, but I think that this is what you're doing. So I'm not going to do a full lunge. I'm just going to bring my leg up here. But you can see that if my butt's sticking out, I'm going to get to the point where this thigh and my belly and hip all crunch in. Do you see how it's all super crunched in there right now? And so imagine I'm in a deep lunge. I'm going to start to feel that crunch, and that's when I'm going to want to take the leg out to the side to get deeper. Instead of doing that, think about lifting out of the hip joint. So you've got, for that, it's about bringing that pubic bone up and forward, just like when we were talking about back bends. You're going to try to lift with the lower abs and think about your sides of your body getting tall. I like to call it your meat corset. It's the corset made of you. So all of these muscles around here, your transverse abdominis, your obliques, everything lifting you up and making you taller and lifting out of that hip. And what that's going to do is it's going to create space in this joint so that you can sink really deep without this getting crunched and compressed and the thigh pressing against the belly. So think about bringing the pubic bone forward first before you even sink into the lunge. The other benefit of that is it's really going to start to open up the hips and the quad on the opposite side. So if this is the leg that's back and I'm arching my back, you can see that a lot of the bend is happening here instead of here. I start to bring the hips forward and then I send the leg back. I keep the back as long as possible. I keep pushing my upper butt down and lifting the pubic bone forward. And ooh, Nelly, I can definitely feel that hip flexor stretching a lot more and the quad stretching a lot more. It's a much, much healthier stretch. You don't get the compression in the hip of the front leg, and you get a lot of beautiful stretch through the whole front of the back leg and hip. So try that out. See how it feels. See if it feels a little bit better. You won't be able to sink nearly as deeply into the lunge, and that's okay. That's the point, because you're going to be getting a deeper stretch without sinking as far. Next question. Cheyenne. All right. Tips for people with scoliosis, if you want to do back bends and splits with scoliosis. So, it's different for everybody. And there are different degrees and different kinds of scoliosis. From the photo that you sent me, it was hard for me to really see your back because you're kind of leaning forward towards the camera. I do have a number of students who I work with who have scoliosis and who have made humongous gains in their flexibility, both back bends and legs and hips. But it does require a certain amount of attention to what's going on in your body and to the rotation that is inherent in anyone who has scoliosis. So naturally your hips will be a little bit shifted. And to be honest, this is true of most people. Scoliosis, it's a little bit more exaggerated, but most of us are a little bit twisty and twerky in our bodies. We aren't perfectly aligned because, life. So you get these rotations. So if you have the exaggerated rotation of scoliosis, then you have to pay attention. Like if you know that this part of your rib is often forward and this part of your hip is often forward, try always keeping in mind to pull that side back and push this forward and to constantly be trying to correct those imbalances. And the more that you work to correct the imbalances, the easier it will get. And it may never be perfect. It may never, get your spine to be completely straight, but it will start to correct it at least a little bit. And it will also enable you to strengthen some of the areas in your body that might be weak because of the scoliosis. So you just have to go slowly and really listen to your body and constantly keep in mind where you're extra tight or extra weak and work on correcting that. And I would honestly give that advice to anybody who is working on back bending, that we all have imbalances that we need to work on. It's just a little bit more exaggerated with the scoliosis. So, but it's still possible to make a lot of gains. Moving right along. Paloma. Working on upper back. So Paloma is working on camel pose, heel pose, and bow pose. So those are all pretty good advanced back bending. But you're not getting a lot of movement in the upper back. So I am going to give you the same advice that I just gave the earlier folks. You've got to find those muscles in the upper back and find that extension. You can't just relax. And also that you're having a sore back. Well, you're probably having a sore lower back, and that's because of collapsing into the lower back because you're not accessing the upper back. So what I would say is don't go as deeply into the stretches right now. Don't go into a full back bend. Don't push into that lower back. Try to find the muscles in the upper back. See if you can videotape yourself. Just do a standing back bend. Try to keep the hips still and find those muscles in the upper back. Once you can find them just standing, you can access that. Then try doing them in your camel pose or your bow pose. Because otherwise, if you're not accessing those upper back muscles, you are just constantly pushing into the lower back, and the upper back won't get better all by itself. It just won't. You have to purposefully work on finding those muscles. All righty, hope that helps. For Gabby, age-appropriate stretching. So what is it like when you're stretching as someone who is, as she put it, she had a wonderful, not in the first flush of youth? We are all getting older, myself included. My birthday's in 2 days, yay! Is it more about maintenance than increasing range as you age? Not necessarily. You can still increase your flexibility. I have students who are in their 50s who are still getting, much more flexible and making breakthroughs in their flexibility. It won't happen as quickly as when you're young, and that's just the body changes as it ages. The joints tend to thicken, and you have less hydration in your body, and it takes you longer to recover from things. There are a lot of reasons why it's harder to gain flexibility as you age, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. You have to train smart. You can't kamikaze into things. I actually have a blog post about aging. It's a 3-part blog post that's going to be posted over the next couple weeks. I'm going to try and put the first installment up really soon. So fitandbendy.com. I'll try to annotate that to this. But I talk a lot about ways of thinking about stretching that are particularly helpful for learning as an adult. because often the way children are taught and the way contortion was traditionally taught is a lot of passive stretching. As you get older, passive stretching is really not the way to go for older bodies. So focus a lot on the stabilization and on the strength of building active flexibility, doing some resistance training, and don't think so much about the end result of where you want to go. Think about where you are now, and you will find that while it doesn't happen overnight, that you can really increase flexibility. And obviously, the more you work on it, the faster it comes. So the more often you can do it, if you can stretch at least 3 days a week, it makes a big difference. But yeah, you can teach old dogs new tricks. Yeah, the body can keep learning up into a much more advanced age than we give it credit for. You just have to train smart, not go too fast. All right, Armando. Armando was doing open splits for a long time. They weren't super open though, Armando. They were pretty good, but I can see the difference between that and your square splits that you're working on now. But now that Armando is working from the correct alignment, he doesn't feel a stretch anywhere, but he feels stuck. I'm guessing. So you said you feel it. You don't feel a lot of stretch in your hamstring. Your hamstrings are pretty loose, but your hips are really tight. So this is actually a really common thing that happens when you've been stretching with your hips open for a really long time and then you square them. Sometimes it feels like nothing is happening. And that is because the muscle that you're stretching in your hip, and this is particularly true of the hips, is so tight and so on lockdown. It's like trying to stretch a bridge cable. It's like trying to stretch a piece of leather. Nothing is happening. Or it feels like nothing is happening, but something is happening. So what I would say, and I think that you're doing this, is start to work on your lunges a lot more and work on just working into that hip, and it will start to open up. The other thing is to look at what you're doing in your life that might be keeping that hip so tight. So it's not just about stretching it in square, it's also about strengthening the muscles around that hip flexor. So strengthening your abductors, strengthening the hip extensor, so the hamstrings and where the hamstring meets the butt, that downstairs butt muscle that we've talked about a couple times, because as those muscles get stronger, they will take some of the pressure off of that hip flexor, and the hip flexor will be able to open up more. I used to have bridge cable hip flexors from being a dancer, and all the kicking. It's a common problem for dancers to have really, really tight hips, especially if they're lordotic. So when I first started trying to stretch my hips and square, it felt impossible and not like the normal stretching feeling where you can feel something lengthening, because it was too tight. It just wouldn't lengthen. But over time of working on it, it will start to go, I promise. But work on it more in lunge than in split. Not that you shouldn't do your splits, but do a lot of lunges, because that's where you can really fine tune the alignment and what you need, and feel that engagement through the hamstrings. Try to use the hamstrings to push into the hips to try to open up the hips. And work on active flexibility as well. So back leg lifts, anything where you're using your butt to try to open up the front of the hip will make a big difference. But don't worry, it's normal. Next, Sonia. Ankle weights and middle splits against the wall. So I don't know. I mean, I looked at your knees. She's worried about her knees when lying with the butt up against the wall, letting the legs fall open and then using ankle weights. So I looked at the photo and I see that your knees are a little bit hyperextended out to the side, which is, it's not unusual and it's not the end of the world, but I would say that I am hesitant to advocate ankle weights in that position. I know a lot of people use them. A lot of people love them. And if you're someone who's out there and you're using ankle weights, you're like, I don't have any knee problems, everything's fine. I'm not saying, oh, you definitely shouldn't do it. But I'm saying that I'm really cautious to advocate it for people, because if you do have any problems with your knees and you're doing that, it is a lot of shearing pressure on the knee. So you imagine the ankle weight is pulling your leg down that way. If your hips are really tight and your knees are kind of loose and wonky, then a lot of the stretch is just going to go into your knee joint instead of into your hip joint. And that's true always of middle splits. So if you are going to use ankle weights and do that, you have to keep the muscles in the knees engaged. So you have to keep the knee muscle actually working to hold the knee in place. You shouldn't just relax the knee, because that's going to definitely put pressure on the knee joint. If you are really committed to the idea of using weights, what I would recommend is you take a sandbag or something like that and you put it on your thigh in that position instead of on your ankle, so that when you're lying on your back, got your butt up against the wall, you let the legs fall open, the weights go above the knee instead of below the knee, so that when you're pushing, you don't get that hyperextension there. Imagine that my knuckles are the knee joint, that hyperextension through the knee, all of the weight is pressing just on the hip. But that's a lot of passive stretching. And as you probably know, if you've listened to me for any length of time, an emphasis on passive stretching isn't my favorite way of building flexibility. So what I would recommend is work on strengthening your abductor muscles, the outside of the hips. So when you're lying on your back with your legs open, try squeezing the outside legs and actively trying to push your legs open using those muscles. At first it might feel really difficult. You might not get any movement at all, but over time, as those muscles get stronger, they will help your adductors, your inner thighs, to open up more. So just try that, and that will not hurt your knees at all. It will be good for your hips. Okay. Moving swiftly along. Sabine, you're welcome for the answers last time. That's a pleasure. Glad that you're seeing some improvement. And Sabine is having a similar problem with moving the leg to the front and feeling the compression in the front of the hip. So I'm going to say the same thing to you, that you probably are sinking into that hip joint too much. So this is really common, and we sit so much in our lives. And so here, let's look at me sitting for a minute. See if you can see that. So here I am, I'm sitting, I'm not thinking about things, and the tendency is to let the belly fall forward onto the thighs, or to kind of slump a little bit, right? We like to slump. So then I'm like sitting back, right, bit like this. Either way, what happens is I'm sinking down into the hip joint. This is compressing, and I can even feel it. It starts to feel like a little bit of a knot here. And so when you go from that to try to stretch and open this hip or bring the leg forward, and you don't lift up out of the hip joint, you're going to get that same sinking sensation into the hip and that compression. And the compression in the hip over many years of sitting and kind of letting your weight sit down into the hip joint is a big part of why our hips are so freaking tight all the time. Too much sitting is the worst. Just never sit. Right. Just sit as little as you can. And when you do sit, think about lifting up out of the hip joints. When you're standing, think about lifting out of the hip joints. Again, it's that meat corset feeling. It's all of these muscles through the torso lifting you up out of your hips. And if you try it, just try it right now. It's fun. Try finding your hip bones and thinking about lengthening up out of the hip bones. And then think about pushing your butt down and lengthening out of your lower back, so all of it gets longer. Then when the leg comes forward, keep that length and see if it feels even just a teeny weeny bit different. It might take a little while to ungum up that joint if it's all gummy and kind of stuck together and tight. But the more that you lift up as the leg comes forward, the less compressed the joint will be. So just try that and see if it helps. If it doesn't, let me know, and I have some other ideas as well. Armando again. This is a question from last week that I missed last week. Armando's working on splits and bridge and doing a lot of isometrics 6 days a week. I salute you, Armando. That's wonderful. Can you train movements with isometrics twice a day to progress faster, or keep your schedule the same? What can I do to progress faster without injuring yourself? Why are you in such a rush, Armando, my dear? Here's the thing about stretching is that faster isn't a great goal. It's a human goal because we all want everything right now, and that's normal. But faster, you can think better, deeper, longer, prettier, but try not to put faster on that list of goals that you have for yourself for stretching. Because I think that what happens is it's easy to overtrain stretching. And we also have a culture that advocates overtraining, that do it all now, do it till you puke. I have a blog post about this too, that overtraining and that go till you puke is not a great way to approach flexibility training. It's too easy to injure yourself. And there just isn't a fast solution to gaining flexibility. It's slow and steady. As my wonderful coach, Serge Moz, used to say, small by small, just little bit at a time. And you're doing 6 days a week, for God's sake. You're doing great. Like you're doing everything right. You don't need to add anything else. I would say instead of thinking about adding more training, try to get smarter with your training. Really get into your body, figure out what's working, figure out what's not working, find your imbalances, find the things that are really tough for you, maybe spend a little extra time on the things that are really tough and less time on the things that are easy, which is hard because the easier things are always a little more fun because you get to look awesome. But train smarter, not more. And that way you'll have the longevity, you won't injure yourself, and you'll have time to go do other awesome things. So yeah, you're doing great. Don't worry about it. You don't need faster. Jana, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Maybe it's Yana. I don't know where you're from. Let's see. Are there any foods or vitamins that enhance your stretching ability or things that you shouldn't or wouldn't eat? So I'm always a little hesitant to give nutrition advice because I'm not trained as a nutritionist. If people have a lot of nutrition advice, I have a wonderful friend who's a nutritionist in Las Vegas. She's also an aerialist for Cirque du Soleil. Her company is called 3 Ring Wellness, and she specializes in nutrition advice for athletes and performers, especially people who have autoimmune disease or have other issues going on where diet becomes particularly important. That said, hydration is probably the biggest piece of advice I can give you. Drink a ton of water. That reminds me. Cheers. Always trying to drink water all day, because what happens is if your body gets dehydrated, all the connective tissue starts to dry out, and also the fascia, the gooey stuff that holds your body together will dry out, and then it starts to stick together, and that's where you get those like really tight, sticky things that just don't work. Your muscles will start to cramp, and your skin won't look as good. And come on, that's important too. So drink water. Essential fatty acids are really good. And a lot of people who do a lot of circus stuff swear by glucosamine, chondroitin with MSM. But it's important to source your vitamins really well, figure out where they come from. I don't recommend just like going into Trader Joe's and buying whatever's on the shelf there. You want to figure out where the vitamins are coming from, how they're made, and how well your body is going to digest them. Because otherwise you just end up peeing bright green and wasting your money. It's true. So if you have specific questions, I definitely would refer you to 3 Ring Wellness. My Facebook page is just connected to hers. But beyond that, I'm hesitant to give lots of detailed advice because it's not really my area of expertise. I like to at least pretend I know what I'm talking about. Last question for Autumn. Oversplits for right and left splits. I'm just now starting my oversplit journey. You look very nice, Autumn. It looks good. Where do you put the blocks underneath your front and back leg for oversplits? So first of all, if you're just starting your work into the wonderful world of oversplits, I would recommend not doing the back leg high yet, because that's pretty intense on the hip. Just do the front leg, and that will be enough for now. And so you want to take the yoga block and you want to put it in front of you, and make sure that it is exactly in front of you, not off to the side, because you want your leg to go exactly in front of you, and then you just put the heel on the block. Just put the heel plop in the center of the block. So you don't want the block to be hitting you on the shin or the calf. You want it just right under the heel of the foot. And for those of you who have been doing oversplits for a while and you do want to do the back leg high, the closer the block is to your foot rather than your knee on your shin, the harder it is. So if it's close to your knee, that's going to make it a lot easier to straighten. It takes a lot less muscle to straighten the leg and to get that deep hip stretch. If you're putting the block underneath your foot, then that's going to give you the deepest and best, I'm not gonna say best. It's going to give you a deeper stretch, and it's gonna force you to really engage your muscle, because you try and get that back leg straight, and it's gonna be much harder with the block under your foot rather than underneath your shin. Never wanna put the block under your knee, because that would be very hard for your knee. And I forgot, I had a question for Lily. Lily, my dear Lily, who's back in LA, and I miss you very much. And remind myself what Lily wanted to know. Sorry, Lily. Lily had a question about, oh yes, Lily had a question about the hamstring stretches at the beginning of the Bendy Body DVD. So when you're lying on your back and you're extending the leg and bending the leg and no support, just using your muscles to do that. And Lily was saying that she doesn't feel this as a hamstring stretch, more as a quad strengthener and hip flexor engagement. Lily has a lot of great hamstring flexibility. So it's not surprising, Lily, that you would not feel this as a stretch, because when your leg is that high up in the air, you're not at the limit of your range of motion yet. So what we're doing for you in particular is building this muscles to be able to have more active flexibility. So we're decreasing the difference between your passive range of flexibility, which in your hamstrings is very good, and your active range of flexibility, which is getting really good. So the higher you can lift your leg by strengthening those muscles, eventually the goal is to get the active flexibility, passive stretch flexibility to match, so that when you are using your muscles, you're also getting the stretch. That's tough to do, but it's an admirable goal. So for someone who has really tight hamstrings, that might already be the case. If the leg is stronger than it is flexible, then the flexibility might be more of an issue. But for you, because you already have a high degree of passive flexibility, we're just trying to build the strength to increase the active flexibility. Hope that makes sense. All right, guys. Well, I have been chatting on for quite some time, and that's all for this week. I'm going to be doing this every week for the whole splits challenge. So I'm going to be posting a new event for next week, and you can put all of your questions underneath that. You can also put your photos with questions on Instagram, #AskFitAndBendy. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Mwah. See you soon.